Professor Konrad Kording in a conversation about modeling in computational neuroscience. Konrad Kording is Professor of Bioengineering and Neuroscience at the University of Pennsylvania. Professor Kording is advancing the frontiers of computational neuroscience, with an emphasis on leveraging modern methods of data science, machine learning and methods from adjacent fields such as economics for the research in his lab. Here, Professor Kording discusses the How to Model Guide for Neuroscientists and the Equal Access Neuromatch Academy 2020 online summer school. The interview is conducted by Dr. Randal Koene.
Right, so I guess I will just start over again to say hi, it's wonderful to have you here. I think it's been about a year since we did an interview, and today I'm hoping that we can talk about two things that go hand in hand. One is the How to Model Guide for Neuroscientists that you recently published together with your co-authors, and the second one is about the Neuromatch Academy 2020. And I probably want to spend something like 30 to 40% of the time on Neuromatch Academy and the remaining time about the model guide. If that sounds about right to you, what do you think is a good division of time?
Yeah, no, that sounds like a great division of time. There's a lot I have to say about the academy, but of course I also have strong opinions about modeling. And just to add to that, like, it's exciting to be on your show again.
Yay, thank you. So you wrote this modeling guide together with your co-authors, Gunnar Blom. I don't know if that's how he pronounces his last name, but I'll just say Blom, and Paul Schrader. Would you like to give a brief summary of what the guide is about?
Yeah, so every year we've been running this summer school. It's called Cosmo for 7-8 years. And every year we bring in 40 students. They spend 2 weeks of very intensive work with us, which is they basically spend 6, 7, 8, 10 hours a day learning about things, and then they run projects on top of it. So it's super intensive. And the goal of that school is to try and help people think about modeling and become clear about what modeling is about and what the process is and how we approach that and so forth. And over these years, we developed ways of kind of trying to teach how you can think like a modeler. And very much this document is about us trying to bring this, like, how do we teach modeling to people, to bring that onto paper so that it's usable for more people. And that's also what bridges between the two parts that we're talking about. Now, like, this is a document about how to teach modeling, and Neuromatch Academy is a summer school that is also aimed at teaching people how to model. So this paper, if you want, is a bridge between those two.
Okay. And it sounds like it was developed as sort of the output of having done a lot of modeling and learned a lot of things that are good and a lot of things that are bad, and having a huge pile of notes, and then eventually trying to make the most sense of it and making something that just presents the whole picture. Is that approximately how that happened, or is there a different history behind it?
Look, the feedback is really interesting. So what you do at such a summer school, and I should mention there's a few other related summer schools. There's CCA that's running in China. There's a summer school that's running in Africa. There's a computational neuroscience school in Woods Hole. So there's a lot of those. And at these summer schools, you have two things. You have this teaching component where you try and bring across skills that people can use that make them into better neuroscientists. And you also try to guide them through projects that they choose. So basically, on every day of a summer school, you observe the teaching in the morning where you try and bring across components of what modeling is about. And in the evening, you see how they apply that to their own projects. So with this mechanism, you can kind of iterate and see, like, okay, now what are the problems? And say, it's very hard for people to get started with modeling. They often are like, okay, here I have data. Now, how do I do modeling? And then you have to say, well, it's not that there's one way of doing modeling. What is the question? What's the data? How does it get us there? How do we bring those two together? What does it even mean for a model to be a meaningful contribution? And what are the models about? And all that is something that we then tried over the years to clarify better and better in that school. And it felt like, as we kept doing it, that at the end of the course, people got further in the later years than they got in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like when you're sitting there with a pile of data, that really before you begin to model, you need to know what it is you're trying to do with the model. What is it you're trying to get out of the data, right? So it's about asking a specific question.
Yeah, and maybe I should plug another paper of ours here, which is called
Sure.
Appreciating the Diversity of Goals in Computational Neuroscience. So if you want, one of the important choices when modeling is, what are the things that we care about in modeling? Now, let's say I could be a mathematician and I could care about things that I can very compactly describe in equations.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have two models, both of which describe the data equally well, I will clearly prefer the model that I can write more efficiently in equations. And that is a legitimate goal for me. But I could alternatively, maybe just purely hypothetically, maybe I'd be interested in simulating brains. Who would want to do such a thing? And if that was my goal, then the way I'd approach it would be very different from the way I'd approach the first goal. And like in the second case, I don't maybe care about the fact that it's not a one line of equations that I can analytically solve. I might be fine with there being a billion lines of code as long as it works. And there's many other objectives. So personally, I've often been interested in normative ideas. So the idea there is that the world gives a set of prompts to the people in the world. Not like, say, if you're foraging for food, there's a prompt. You want to forage, you want to find as many berries in a given time unit as you possibly can. And then you can say, from that perspective, the idea of normative models is that we want to have a model that's of that kind, where I say, here's a problem in the real world. Here's why I believe you should be good at this real world problem. Now let's compare this to how you really are. And so this is another rich tradition. So there, in that paper, Appreciating the Goals of Computational Neuroscience, we talk about 10 different things that people can absolutely legitimately care about. And in a way, which of those 10 factors you count for how much changes the way you approach it. And that is an important thing for summer schools and for everyone who wants to build models in neuroscience, that we need to be aware of what our goals are, and we need to use those goals when we try and make sense of what the paper contributes. No, so basically, if you want to simulate brains, then papers that say compactly or like that summarize a lot of data, or even that just provide a lot of data, might be very valuable. Whereas maybe if what I look for is very compact equations, then I might only look for basically big trends that I can summarize very compactly. And so this awareness of what is it that we're trying to achieve is super central. And a lot of people kind of ignore that. And that is also the reason why this paper is so important from my perspective. So for a lot of people, the modeling process works like that. I do an experiment, I get lots of data. Then I stare at the data, and then I do some computer stuff. And then in the end, kind of, I have a model. But then the question is, okay, now which stance do I take? What kind of deliverables do I want my model to have? And all that, in a way, flows into this like modeling process paper.
Yeah. Did you find that there are a lot of people who actually begin to model before they know what they're looking for?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
So in parts, it's a good thing. Now you can say, if I'm in a really new domain and I don't know the rules of this domain yet, you can say one of the best things that I could do is just I measure a few things. Maybe I measure things where I have reasons to believe that they're meaningful from an ethological perspective. And then I eyeball them. And then once I eyeball them, I see if I can somehow report something that appears to be meaningful in the data. And a lot of early progress in all scientific domains start like that. Like, just give me the data. Now let's look at the simple things. Maybe let's look what happens if we ignore all axes apart from one of them in the stimuli. Let's maybe run a principal component analysis. There is this early exploratory data analysis stage. And now the question is, where is neuroscience at? And that is highly debated in the field. No? There are people who feel we are far enough that we can really get towards overarching theories, and the models that we build might have to be models of how the entire brain works. And there are other people who still say we're like in a very early domain where basically the best thing we could do is just run good experiments and hope that we will see things in the data. And then the modeling works very differently. Now let's say you give me all the data from C. elegans, or like some other animal, and it's enough of that, then I might want to basically fit models that would be really good at simulating that one. Let's say you're in another domain and you just want to say in fMRI images, maybe of humans, can I see things that like relate to how surprised I am? That is equally an important question. And where on this axis where it might differ across animal species. Now, maybe it's time to start making progress on C. elegans. Maybe the overarching theory of humans might still be a long distance away. But regardless of which of these stances you take, you then need to have a good process of getting from the data and the phenomena that you're interested in into kind of a meaningful model that really speaks to your question.
Right. Yes. And so as I was going through the, say, 10-step model, a part that seemed to me like something that is particularly difficult in modeling. Let me just back up for a second. One of the examples that you used in the paper was the example of exploring a clock or a clock mechanism, right?
Yeah, we can all relate to mechanical clocks.
Yeah,
No? Like
yeah.
we all, at least I fondly remember first seeing a clockwork. It's just so fascinating.
Yeah, and so there's a part in there, there's a step where in the analysis of the clock mechanism, you go from what is basically a flowchart model of the mechanism to a dynamic model of the clock. And to me, that seems like one of the most difficult steps in a modeling exercise. I mean, aside from the original question, knowing what you're actually looking for with the data you've been given, once you're then going through those 10 steps, that is a very, to me, a difficult step to make. You know, because that involves some sort of processes which often seem very implicit, very much just a matter of experience of how do you then make the right decision for the type of more abstract formal model that you're going to use. How does the process that you've described in this paper, or maybe even in the course, if we're going to talk about that later, how does that help with that crucial step? Is it this ability to play with the model as you're there and just changing specific parts so that you can see what matters and how? Is that how you then decide what is the better formal way to describe what's going on?
Yeah, this is, I mean, like you hit the nail on the head. It's the thing that is so difficult is that space of models that you could in principle use is of course infinite sized. No? And it's exponentially infinite sized. It's very, very difficult to deal with that space. And so in a way, the question is a question about the creative process. No, how do we, if we look at data, what are kind of the thoughts that we're looking for in our data? And this is something for which there cannot be a universal answer. But I think in parts I agree with your characterization. So often what happens at that point of time of the process is that you play with ideas. So it's very playful. No? Like you usually draw, most people that are successful in neuroscience draw from a background space of, if you want, a reservoir of possible models. Now, the physicists come with models inspired by modeling physics, and they come with very different models. No? The people who have worked on statistical mechanics will and do approach problems very differently, much more information theoretically than, say, people who have more like mechanics, a classical mechanics background. And so there's this strong this background of possible models that people carry with them. And say people that come from electrical engineering, very successful people in neuroscience, come with models that come more maybe from signal processing, and people come with all those different background models. So say maybe people that come more from psychology into neuroscience, they draw from a model space that comes from that background. And I think for both the paper about modeling and for summer schools about modeling, there is this importance that in a way you need to produce useful insights for people who come with all these different backgrounds. So within one domain, if I only speak to people from statistical physics, maybe, it would be much easier to describe this set of models that we have in common. And indeed, if you look at the paper, we don't describe that set. There's some formalisms. No, we divide the space of potential models into models that are about the what, models that are about the how, and maybe models that are about the why. But we can't meaningfully list all of them. And in a way, it's a good thing, no? That the people that come from different backgrounds basically draw from a different set of inspirations for doing this scale transition, where I look at data at a micro level, but I want to see something big in the data.
Yeah, this is a part that for example, when people talk about making an artificial intelligence that could act as a scientist, the AI scientist agent concept, that seems to me still very difficult because, for instance, in just this one example of the clock, when you're going from the mechanistic sort of flowchart version to the dynamic model, it's not like you're just abstracting by averaging over a certain number of components or something like that. It's not that at all. It's a complete transformation of how to think about it. You're changing the type of basically how are you even looking at it, as you said, like the how and the what, or those different ways of looking at the problem, and you're changing even the type of signals that you're thinking about in that case, and knowing how to go from the one set to the other set, that's definitely not an easy thing to do. Yeah, and
Yes,
this kind of
I hope is a little bit that
yeah.
people see this process where you say, okay, look, here's an idea, here's how it's being used in a model, here's a very different idea, maybe an idea that is not different in different, a little bit, a similar thing, not like an idea that comes from a completely different background and that is also successfully applied. And that they kind of see this process of basically how going from a set of concepts into a new model, how that is something that you can do, in fact, regardless of where you come from. And it's this richness of these transitions that is just so great. But yeah, this is the ultimately difficult question. What is that space from which we draw these meaningful inspirations?
Yeah, to me, this feels like the place where people make breakthroughs when they do modeling, because if they make the right translation, then you suddenly see things in a new light and you understand something new. And that's really hard if you want to say automate the whole process, because AI hasn't even really mastered how to do transfer learning. So going from one,
then there's another one, which is in a way models built by humans aren't just good models, they're also good models for humans. Now, we see that in AI, where we can apply machine learning to domains, say text or something, where these models might become better than us, but the underlying, if you want, theories or models are very much not like the models that you or me would have it. Now, when it comes to the understanding of text,
yeah.
for us, it's text is usually in a very compact causal way, like this happens because of this happens, or the way I interpret that is because that is the verb of the sentence. So a machine learning system might kind of have like concepts like that, but it also has all kinds of things that kind of for us wouldn't be legitimate models because they can't be compactly expressed.
Mm-hmm.
But a machine learning system kind of doesn't have that knowledge. And therefore there might be ways where machine learning model systems will become better than us in a lot of modeling domains. But the question is that what we mean? They might become better at describing variance or making predictions
Yeah.
if we feed them enough data. But But a model that would have 1 million parameters is not a model that I can kind of communicate to you. And therefore, on the grand scale of things, it's not really what we're striving for as neuroscientists. And in that context, there's another paper that I want to mention here that is exactly about this complexity problem in neuroscience. It's a paper with Tim Lillicrap. It's on arXiv at the moment. It's called "What Does It Mean to Understand a Neural Network?" And it's all about this problem that basically the systems that we have may use a lot of parameters and a lot of complexity, potentially more than what humans can understand. And then the question is, what should we be doing in those cases?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to jump ahead to a question I was going to ask much later because it seems to relate to this, which is that we're going to talk a lot about using machine learning in neuroscience, but I think that it's interesting to consider what the differences are between someone who uses machine learning in an application or production environment compared to someone who's using it in neuroscience. For instance, I know from Andrej Karpathy, who's the Tesla AI director, that he spends most of his time trying to deal with special cases that are in the long tail of the distribution, just trying to make sure that the vehicle can operate correctly. And there are all those very extreme sort of eccentric situations as well. And of course, the models are learned in a way, just like you described with language, where perhaps what they've learned is, okay, I'm just going to go to the language example right now. I predict that the most likely word that we're going to see next is one of these because in all of the volumes of text that I've seen, that's kind of what I've pulled out of it in terms of the statistics. And that's not the same as how we make sentences, for instance. And the same way the cars are learning how to drive may be very different from how we learn how to drive. So I'm wondering, if there's, even for people who use machine learning in neuroscience versus learning it in an applied sort of production application science, what do you think are the differences? And is there also a crossover, say, for people who are trained in one or the other?
Yeah, so maybe I should start with the crossover component. So right now, I think is an incredibly fertile time for that crossover. You have people like Tim Lillicrap that basically smoothly move from neuroscience to computation. He's working with DeepMind on all kinds of real world problems. And equally, there's more and more people that kind of move into neuroscience that have that background. For example, Blake Richards, like he has this long-going interest in AI. I believe he studied with Hinton at some point of time, and now he's doing neuroscience really about microcircuits. How could a microcircuit do something like the backpropagation algorithm? So I think there's like a very fertile base for this crosstalk, and a lot of people in neuroscience are starting to tune in. And I think a lot of people on the AI side are starting to be interested in neuroscience. So at the Neuromatch Academy that we'll talk about later, there's a whole bunch of people who have a background more on the AI side that really are interested in neuroscience and want to hear about how computational neuroscientists think about brains. So I think there's a lot going on. Now, I forgot the first half of your question.
Oh, it was just, what differences there are about applying machine learning in neuroscience versus applying them to a product that needs to achieve something.
So this is wonderful because it gets us to we need to be clear about our questions and objective part that we talked about a little earlier. So if we have someone doing machine learning in neuroscience, there are different reasons why they do so. So for example, I might be a neuroscientist who wants to build a great prosthetic device. So we talk about people who lost their arm and they get a nice new prosthetic arm here. And I might do machine learning for systems like that. In that case, what do I care about? Well, I care about being good at predicting how the person wants to move their arm. That's it. That's where it ends. At that level, I can operate, and I want to operate like a machine learner, no? Because I just care about my R squared, and I will use like blending of different methods and like Google scale compute to train the best possible deep learning network on it and all that. And I can basically very much do neuroscience while sitting in a machine learning mindset. But let's take the opposite. Say I might be a machine learning person in neuroscience. I know from machine learning that credit assignment is important. So if we want a system to work well, it's very attractive if it changes its properties so that it gets better. So we want the changes to be similar to the gradient. So in that sense, if I come from AI, now I take my concepts from AI, they build this model system. Now you talked about it earlier, that in a way we draw from some background. Now in that case, I as the machine learning person moving into neuroscience draw from a background of understanding aspects about credit assignment. And then I might want to look in the intricate biological details of a microcircuit. Do I find reflections of that? And there's a lot of research in that direction with people like Walter Sen, or again, Blake Richards, or Joel Silberberg. There's a lot of beautiful research in that space where people take like this model space from machine learning and move it to neuroscience. So therefore the question like is what's the mindset for AI in neuroscience? Well, it depends on on the exact deliverable that you ask yourself. And so like in that case, the first deliverable is low R squared at estimating what I want to do for my prosthetic arm, or for the other one is being actually biologically correct. Those two are completely different objectives, and it leads you to a very different mindset in the way you approach these things.
Yeah, okay, great. When is a model finished?
This is a great question, and the answer probably has to be never. But there's a shorter term answer, and I wonder how much you'll agree with.
When can a model be triaged? When can you say I'm done with this model and I go to the next?
So you could say at least for me, in a way, the ultimate endpoint for an individual model is the paper that goes with it. And I believe that if you produce a new model, it is good to make a paper out of that. And I believe that there's two reasons for that. The first reason for that is that basically by you making a paper out of it, you allow others to evaluate if this is a nice idea. The fact that you spent all that time on it means that you feel it's an idea worth investing in. That makes it likely that others find it an idea worth investing in. So if the idea is good or bad, you should bring that out so that other people can know if they should go down that path or not. And if it's a good model, then others might find a way of making it into a great model. And if it is a really crappy model, then it is good for others to know that they should look elsewhere. So in that sense, yeah, there's like a truly interesting space about that. But in any case, so the first answer to your question is like a model in a way is finished as soon as we reach the paper, because the second one is models are never finished. So models are an infinite chain of ideas that build on previous ideas. No, very much so. So in a typical machine learning system from today, hey, it's kind of linear regression on steroids, and linear regression is really old. And then it's linear regression with like nonlinear credit assignment, which is like just calculating derivatives, which is ancient just as well. And so every one model is just like taking that set of previous models and taking it one step further. Or even if you look at models that in neuroscience, say information theory, not like information theory is beautiful when we want to understand brains, but information theory, well, it derives from information theory as applied to neuroscience, derives from information theory, where it takes whole ideas more or less wholehearted in the entirely, and then changes aspects of that to make it more appropriate. And now every useful model in a way is going to be like some useful models basically give rise to a lot of children. And that's one way of being good. Alternatively, a model makes a lot of other models seem less attractive, maybe because it shows that there's a fundamental limitation of models and so forth. Yeah. So in that sense, it's also important, namely by the model children, that it prevents from happening. So but in that sense, like none of the models are ever gone. Like in a way, models flow into the way into like the zeitgeist of modeling, and in that sense they stay forever.
It's interesting that even as someone who speaks German, you say Zeitgeist instead of Zeitgeist.
Uh, well,
I do that too.
maybe
It's
that's
normal, yeah.
for the audience.
Exactly.
It's a zeitgeist,
Yeah,
indeed.
yeah. But I thought this was great because what happened is from talking about when is a model finished, you went to talking about when is a model good versus when is a model bad, which was actually a question I also had, was going to ask. And you basically said, well, if a model is making many other models obviously wrong, that's one way of being good. If a model has many children, then that's another way of being good. And you could say, well, when you've gotten to the point where you could predict that your model is probably more good than bad, then maybe that's the right time to publish it, and then it's kind of finished. Although maybe there are some other guidelines as well, like publish as soon as you can, just so that you can get as many publications out of it as possible.
But yeah, let me push back a little against that. So the goal isn't just to be influential. The goal of a model, much more importantly, is for the model to be good according to its criteria. You know, like basically, if you have lots of children, like then you're influential. It doesn't yet make you good. There's very, very bad models that have like lots of copies of them. So for a model to be good, if you want, it needs to be the readers need to be able to understand what the model is about. So what is explained by it? Why is that useful? What are the generalizable ideas of that? But then also it depends on which of the 10 criteria you subscribe to which level. So there is kind of a downstream problem there. So it's important for people to realize it's not the case that there are no good versus bad criteria beyond just the successful of a model.
Mm-hmm.
No, there are, and that is super important. And to be able to discuss that, we need to be clear about what our criteria are. So let's say you write a model, I write a model.
Yeah.
If now your model might cater to different criteria than my model, in which case it's impossible to say if your model is better or mine. No, because like your model might like make the prosthetic device move right, and my model might be a good model of how the brain actually does it. Those two have completely different deliverables, and in that sense, we might both have the perfect model.
Right.
But
yeah.
So in that sense, it's important to be clear about what the objectives are of a model. And once you're clear about it, you'll often find that developing the model is rather straightforward. You know, like you know where you're going. You have a North Pole. Whereas whereas in many cases people are unclear. And probably the majority of papers, maybe the vast majority of papers, is unclear what the exact modeling objectives are about. And if we have two papers that subscribe to the same modeling objectives and they're the same, then yes, we can say which model is better.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's very great that you brought me back to reality there, because of course it is extremely important. In fact, I feel like anyone who publishes a model should above all make it very clear in which context the model should be applied, because that's usually part of the reasoning that goes into picking the right abstraction and the formulation.
Yeah.
And it's also often something that is determined by the data that you have available, and then that determines a context in which you can make statements or make models, and then thereby make statements of some kind. In fact, at some point, I was toying with the idea that perhaps everyone who publishes a new model should at least show one clear case where the model is known to fail, or something of that nature, just to show the limitations of the model. But maybe that's too much to ask in addition
Well,
to...
I think it's a great exercise. I love papers that do that. And I find it super infuriating if reviewers make you take it out. It's just so bad if they do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is wasting space in the journal, of course.
Yeah, and it's not at all wasting space. It's what makes it useful.
Right, yeah. So at one point you mentioned that it's important, well, at one point, we've been talking about publishing, but you talk about the importance of choosing your target audience.
Yeah. Okay, we have a bit of an internet failure right now.
That makes a lot of sense to me, but it's not, of course, the natural thing for a modeler to do when writing, because modelers are used to writing for other people who make models, right?
Yeah, so Randall, we briefly lost you here. Maybe
Oh,
you can you ask the question again, just so that we can make sure that this is all complete?
sure. I hope that doesn't happen again. I'm sitting in a little recording booth that has been converted into, say, a guest room, and I'm afraid the Wi-Fi isn't the best in here, even though it's quiet in here. So what I was asking is, when you publish a model, it's important to know your target audience. And in the paper, you write that the audience for a published model is often experimentalists, which makes a lot of sense to me in terms of what you want the next iteration to be on getting to another model. But it's not necessarily natural to the modeler to write that way because they are used to writing for other modelers who know how to implement models.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a real problem in the field that divides. There's other communities that seem to be better at doing that. Like in physics, the division is much clearer, but they have a history of that debate. So modeling in neuroscience as a popular approach is relatively new. It long was seen as like that weird thing that isn't really mainstream yet, and that might still be the case. So it's right that that models. So I think different modeling papers have different roles. So there are modeling papers that have a legitimate audience as other modelers, which are the papers that say make advantages that are helpful for other modelers to build on. And I think that that's very important. And then there's other papers that take models, maybe models that aren't even so cutting edge in a way, and make that be accessible to the experimentalists. Now we have a big problem in the way we do credit assignment. So um, people who do who write those papers, which basically take like nice models but make it accessible to the experimentalists, these people get massive credit. Now, like, let me give myself as an example. I wrote a paper that used a Bayesian way of modeling behavior. It got published in Nature. It made a lot of sense to a lot of experimentalists who then understood some of those concepts, and a lot of these concepts ultimately made it into experiments, which was great. But in a way, my contribution to progress of models was very, very limited in that paper. And so there is this disconnect, no? Because the sizes of the subfields are so big. If you want, a lot of the sites occur on the sides of those bridge builders. And that might not be ideal, because some people that produce the most precise, most beautiful models in a way cannot sell to a really broad audience because their models are just really hard. So in that sense, I think that there's a real structural problem where where basically we don't give enough incentives of really pushing the limits on the modeling side per se.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned physics as another example. And when I think of the interplay between theoretical physicists and practical experimental physicists, you often get the impression that instead of putting all the weight on the theoretical physicists to describe what they're thinking about in the way that makes the most sense for someone who needs to make an experiment, the experimentalists will take a long time to digest the theory and they understand how to read theory papers and then to gradually build up experiments from that. Or am I seeing that wrong?
Okay, I'm not so sure just of physics. At least from the outside, it certainly depends on which corner of physics you're talking about. But let's say in high energy
That
physics,
was actually the one I was thinking about, yeah.
but it does seem that there's a decent flow of information. No, so. Okay, I don't know how big the problems are in that field. It seemed to me from the outside as if there was a field in which that communication worked relatively well,
Yeah.
because a lot of, let's say, if they build a new accelerator, it's usually done with here's our calculations. This is exactly what we, from a theory perspective, expect to find. This is what it would mean if we would find that. So they seem to be building those logics very well. But then again, we talk about project like multi-billion-dollar projects, and
Right.
of course, for a multi-billion-dollar project, you better cross your T's and dot your I's. So, so it's possible that it's just in the parts of that field that I can see things seem to go well. But then in physics, there is a general demand of math literacy. And in neuroscience, we don't yet have this very high level of, like, say, data science literacy.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times it's that for experimentalist parts that are rather obvious from a theory perspective aren't yet digestible just because of the lack of training there, which brings us back to the Neuromatch Academy, because the goal of the academy in a way is helping people who have primarily experimental background and some people with theoretical background basically find their way into computational neuroscience. And by doing so, hopefully bringing up like that level of computation/model literacy.
Yeah.
And if more people have that, I think we will be able to have more meaningful and more fun discussions.
Indeed. I think this is a great point to actually switch over to that topic. And just to clarify to anyone who's listening, that so this summer, together with a large team of scientists from universities and research institutions all over the country, I even noticed that Brad Weibel is involved, who's a colleague of mine from back in the Hasselmo lab in Boston. You're organizing this Neuromatch Academy 2020, which is, of course, the successor of some previous courses that you've done. So why does the Neuromatch 2020 course exist, and why are you creating it the way that you are?
Yeah, so we've been running this summer school every year. It's called Cosmo. It basically teaches good data skills to movement scientists. It's a somewhat specialized summer school. But over the last couple of years, we had already been drifting very much into like a more general purpose data science structure, because that's what students wanted to learn. And then this year came with COVID-19 and we canceled our summer course. We were like, okay, that's it. But then I ran this conference. It was called Neuromatch, neuromatch.io. And all of a sudden, lots of people tuned in. It came as a bit of a surprise that it got so popular. And importantly, we had a matching component where we try and bring together people with other people that have similar interests. It's a bit like a virtual coffee cooler, a water cooler.
Yeah.
So we basically take people with similar interests, we introduce them to one another, and we tell them, well, make sure you Skype with one another and talk about your research. And we had run that on conferences before, real-world conferences, where it worked really well. And so we wanted to bring that online. And then we added more lecturers, and all of a sudden we had a really big conference with 3,000 participants. And seeing that, it kind of felt real. It felt like there was community. It felt like this was really a viable way of running conferences. So then afterwards, my feeling of it and that of the other co-organizers also changed radically, where we said, basically, look, if we can make this conference thing work, we should be able to make a summer school work. And then we asked for the size of the audience, and it turned out that the audience was really big that would be interested in something like that. And so then what we did is we basically revamped the school so that it teaches data science and modeling skills for people that have Python and linear algebra background, and that it kind of brings that all together. And that's why it's also attractive for people that are maybe more on the computational side, because if I maybe know PCA extremely well already, then the PCA lecture in our summer school is not wasted. It's doubly useful because I will see what people apply PCA to in neuroscience. What are the questions that go with the technique? So a lot of the summer school is exactly about this. What are our real questions? Let's be clear what our questions are. What are the techniques that go with these questions? And now also let's learn how to apply those techniques and properly interpret the results that we get with it. And so every micro part of that summer school will have that flavor where we take people produce clarity about the questions, clarity about how to apply the methods, teach them how to apply the method, and then make sure that we situate that into like a broader arc of what are the meaningful questions and what are the tools to ask those questions. And so in that sense, I believe it will be a great summer school. And the scale is also just mind-boggling. So we are approaching 6,000 applicants for the school. And at that scale, of course, all of a sudden, once we realized how big that audience was, everything changed. So what we want people to give people is the same experience as in one of these intensive schools. So what makes the intensive schools? Where you sit together with like-minded people, you have amazing TAs, you kind of walk together and you get inputs from the professor and you get some famous lectures, but like a lot of it is this in this structure. I learn to do things while people look at my screen and all that. And we're bringing that experience to a very large group. And now you see what those problems are. Not like if we have thousands of people, we need hundreds of TAs, and we need the fundraising for the hundreds of TAs. And all of a sudden, it's no longer just as we did it. Like, yeah, look, if we have 40 people, sure, I prepare my lectures, but I prepare my lectures. I don't like obsess about my lectures. No, like if stuff isn't perfect, then I'm like, okay, guys, let me go to the whiteboard, let me re-explain that, and they'll be like, awesome. Whereas if we run on a thousands big online audience, then we can't have that. So all of a sudden, we're basically faced with within a few months, we basically need to produce top-notch teaching material for everything that we do. And so in that sense, it has changed a lot the focus for that.
So I'm afraid I had a bit of a Wi-Fi problem for a second there. I guess you didn't hear. I was asking about the time zone differences, the fact that you've got people from all over the world now. How are you going to deal with that?
Yes, so we have people on every time zone, or like most time zones on the planet. They roughly distribute into 3 peaks, into 3 modes. We have an America-based peak that is about 3 hours wide, basically East Coast to West Coast. Then we have a UK-based peak that's basically from roughly London all the way to Moscow or something. And then there's a third group of people centered on more like Eastern Asia. And then there's, of course, a few people that are slightly in between. But we will basically run on 3 time zones. And the way that works is the tutorial work. Think about it from a participant's perspective. You sit in a room with like 10 people, they're all on your time zone and are chosen to have similar interests to you. You have like your TA who's also on your time zone. You have these 10-minute lectures that teach you the concepts that are available offline. You can download it ahead of time. You don't need to synchronize. And then we have Q&A sessions that are synchronized. So you basically, there will be opportunities for you to ask questions, and yet you can run on your own time scale. And of course, that means that we have to deal with, okay, how do we produce synchronous sections that happen on multiple different time scales, time zones? But we feel like we're figuring all of that out. Now, will it glitch? You know, like that's one thing that, like, for everyone who's thinking about the summer school, that they need to think about. Yes, this is the first time a summer school that scale is being run. Suddenly, the first time that's being done in computation neuroscience. The scale is unprecedented, and we have this real-time component. So it's not the standard approach that people have. And so in that sense, there will be glitches. You know, like we will fail. There will be things where we'll be like, yeah, that was kind of not great. But at the same time, because of its scale, there's kind of a real incentive for us to like really make this be amazing. And that's what we're working on. That's what a lot of us are basically working for 24/7.
So I'm curious about the distribution of the different topics, because this is like it ultimately kind of converges machine learning and neuroscience, but you have to go through the signals part and then the statistics and stuff, and then you end up with machine learning in the end. But according to the preliminary schedule, it's like 1 week intensive machine learning advances and approaches. And I'm wondering, is 1 week, is that a realistic time to teach machine learning?
Yeah, so it has changed a little from the preliminary syllabus that's still on the webpage. And it may change further. The question is, what does it mean? What's realistic to teach in this at a certain speed? So what's realistic very much depends on who you are. So if you're a super advanced computational neuroscientist, I could teach you all of it in like 3 hours because you know almost everything already. If you're just getting started with computational approaches, then 3 weeks pass in a very short period of time. Now, what is it that we believe we can do? So we believe we can teach an understanding of the concepts, of all the major concepts that make typical neural data analysis and neural modeling approaches and behavioral modeling approaches. We believe that we can teach the important popular techniques to a level where you'll learn how to apply them. We will not make you an expert in any one of them. Now, let's say, but you don't need to be. Say, if you're a neuroscientist and a neurophysiologist, and you say record data from 10,000 neurons or something like that, you don't need to innovate in the space of dimensionality reduction techniques. There's a lot of questions in your data that can be perfectly fine answered with just PCA. If you understand PCA and you understand which questions it deals with, you're a better neuroscientist. It's that basic level that we want to get people to. And yes, of course, we will cover some more advanced topics. And yes, there will be some deep learning in it, but this is not a course to reach like the very highest peaks. If you want, once you realize that what you want to do is re-push in dimensionality reduction, because the question for which dimensionality reduction is the answer is your question, then yes, you can take a whole three-term set of courses that really bring you to the state of the art in those things. That is not our goal. Our goal is basically we take people who have some but not all that much education in that area, and we kind of bring them to the standard techniques. So think about it. We aren't teaching you by and large the techniques that are used in 10 labs. We are teaching people who are in 10,000 labs the techniques that are used in the leading 100 or couple hundred labs. And that is the level of contribution that we're after. So basically, if you're the student who wants to learn the various highest peaks of all of that, well, then you should be a TA in our course. You shouldn't be a student.
Okay, yeah, that almost brings me to my next question. But I wanted to quickly just back up a tiny bit. Because yeah, you mentioned sort of you're teaching what's being done in 100 labs, and that sort of brings me to a question I also had, which is a lot of this course, because it's basically a data science and machine learning and modeling kind of course, is about the sort of things where you could say the mathematical brick and mortar of those things is relatively independent of the state of neuroscience knowledge. But there are, of course, as you said, methods that are used in certain labs, and there's also data, and there's a certain level of understanding. Some things are a reflection of the state of neuroscience. So if you kind of look at the course from that sense, is there, say, some part of it that you would say is always going to be relevant, and there's a part that would have been different 10 years ago, and a part that would be different in 10 years?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that are actually changing, but they're changing slowly. And it's not that the underlying questions change. Now, so let me give you an example. So let's say I record data from 100 neurons, and I want to see, is there some lower dimensional space where the activity of these neurons unfold? I can use a very simple analysis, which is I can just smooth the data a little bit, and then I run PCA. Not like very simple idea. And that works just fine. Or alternatively, I can use a really advanced approach, say Gaussian process factor analysis, which is a really cool statistical technique. Now, those two questions for most applications ask exactly the same question. So if you understand what the question is that goes with it, and you learn how to use PCA to answer that question, GPFA is an obvious plugin. You just ask the same question, replace PCA with GPFA, and in certain definitions, you then gain from that. But But if you want the brick and mortar, much of it is about questions. It's about what does it mean if I run dimensionality reduction? What question does it answer? And that is, if you want, will always be like that. Now, will there be better things than Gaussian process factor analysis? Yes, I can brainstorm a whole bunch of them with you if you want. But that's in a way, and by all means, if in 10 years' time someone went to our course, there will be new things. But these new things kind of follow along that chain. So if you understand the basics, then these highlights are actually very simple once you think about it. So in that sense, I believe that the bulk of what's in the course doesn't at all suffer from skill depreciation. Now, there are aspects that will suffer from skill depreciation. Now, let's say in machine learning, there's currently good standard techniques. There will be better standard techniques in a few years. And we've seen the transition. Like people used to do support vector machines. Now they often use XGBoost for very similar prompts. And what do I know? It might be a flavor of deep learning sometimes in the future, depending on the kind of data and if we have tabular versus spatial data, like all kinds of things go into that. But the big ideas don't change. Like what goes in is that basically we have a matrix of features and a vector of outputs, and I want to predict the outputs based on the matrix. There's like a standard setting that is very much shared. And therefore, I think that this whole conceptual framework is like very unlikely to depreciate. Doesn't mean that when we teach it, like we would still every year there's new things, and we should say this year we might tell certain people here's what we've done, but also for your stuff consider GPFA, or maybe consider non-negative matrix factorization, and here are the cases where you'd want to consider that. But then if you want to go into such into those more specialized things, well, we'll give you the links to it. We won't need to teach exactly how to deal with it.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And you have to make choices, like, you obviously have to choose a specific set of tools to use with the course, and then you have to care about things like, is this something that is freely available? Is it something that has all the right libraries? Is it something that anyone could learn within the time if they needed to? I mean, although, there's some things you just have to know going into it, like a little bit of Python and maybe how to use collabs or something like that.
Yeah, you don't need to know how to use Colab. That's like Colab is just the easiest thing ever. But you need to know how to code in Python, and you do need basics like linear algebra and understand probabilities and be able to like basically at the level where most people can run t-tests and things like that. You need like some of those basic concepts, and you should probably know what neurons are, and so there is some. There is like the basic, so it's like the basic level that anyone who should be in a neuroscience lab should already have. Those are basically our prerequisites. Plus Python. Like we force people into one programming language. Why do we do that? Because supporting multiple programming languages would just add a lot of extra effort for it. And on top of it, the writings on the wall that Python's going to be the big language in neuroscience. They have little doubt.
Ever.
No, of course not forever. Not like there will be new things coming, but
that's clear. Yeah.
But Python is really good at supporting an open collaborative infrastructure, and I think a lot of that of what makes neuroscience beautiful and fun to be in is kind of this collaborative style, the way that like my code can help yours, your code can help mine. That's just beautiful.
Yeah, that ties all the way back to things like being able to share models and all of that, which has been a huge problem in computational neuroscience if you look back a few years. So this is
I don't have code from my anymore. Like I can't run code from my PhD anymore. Okay, that was 20 years ago. And I might not even understand it if I was able to run it. But like basically code from that time really went away. It's probably somewhere on my hard disk, but there's no way of getting it to even run.
So at what stage of the preparations are you now? How ready is the course?
Okay, so we're, I mean, like, look, we started 2 weeks ago to be a little on the realistic side. We have a semi-final curriculum. We have figured out an organizational structure for the whole thing. We have a very we have a shockingly efficient outreach group that basically get the word out in all continents apart from Antarctica, and in a lot of underserved countries. So these things are moving extremely well, and now we're starting to hit the produced content for the summer school threshold roughly. And we will be running we will start running considerable size tests 3 weeks before the summer school. So basically we will run on a small group of guinea pigs, basically the whole summer school a week earlier.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I actually had, I guess maybe it's a question that was already semi-answered in the FAQ, but there's, you can apply for a student track, you can apply for a TA track, and if you apply for the TA track, does that mean that you still have to apply for the student track as well, or what would you
don't
say?
need to double apply. If you apply for the TA track and we decide you aren't the right TA for that course, I mean, we have hundreds of applicants, so it's not that we have a small group. We just want to only showcase TAs where we look really positive that they will produce a great experience for the students. And so everyone who's not selected as a TA, we will basically automatically move them into the student group, and they can then decide if they want to be there or if they don't want to be there. So the rejected TAs can absolutely be on the interactive track and work with the TAs then just as part of a group. And if they are very advanced relative to the group, well, it just brings in this positive energy into the group. So in that sense, I think the TAs and the students, that's kind of almost a continuum. And that's why I think it's important that everyone who will reject as TAs, I mean, we're so thankful that they're willing to spend those 3 weeks with us. And in that sense, the least that we can do is give them the option to go the student track if they want to.
Okay. And what should the students do if they want to prepare for the course? Is it just make sure they've studied everything that is presented on the GitHub, or is there anything else they should do?
So there will be up, or maybe it's already up somewhere, a prereqs document that also highlights how you can acquire them if you don't have them yet. That's the best way to prepare. And then the best way to prepare to do interesting computational neuroscience is do interesting computational neuroscience. Not like take a data set, use Python, run some analysis scripts, see if you can make sense of some data, and ask yourself what the questions are, because everything in life ultimately boils down to having the right questions. And that's, from my perspective, one of the central bottlenecks in neuroscience, that it's very not obvious what the questions are, because what the model space that we want to talk about is very much not obvious and very different between one person from another.
Indeed, yeah. Yeah, I think we've covered a lot now, but of course there's always more. So before we finish up, I should probably ask you if there's anything else that you think the listeners should know that we did not cover.
Well, there's a lot of things that I wish that everyone would know that we didn't cover, but
within neuroscience and modeling, of course.
Yeah, so I think my main message is to use this as the community that it is. Neuromatch is driven by a large collection of very different individuals, and so is computational neuroscience. And different people have different objectives, and it's important to be tolerant of these other objectives. Just because someone is working towards a different goal than you doesn't mean that their model isn't as good as yours. It's just like not the model that aims to answer your model. And in that sense, like the big message that I'd want to give people is be aware of the exact question that you're asking in every paper and communicate that clearly.
I think that's a great message. All right. Yeah, this has been fun and fascinating, as always. I'd like to thank you very much for the wonderful chat. And I also hope that everything turns out really well in Pennsylvania, which is, I think, where you are right now, right?
That's right, yeah.
And at the Neuromatch Academy, because I know, of course, everyone is going through the same situation in a sense right now with the quarantine. Yeah, I hope that the Academy, which becomes a huge hit, which I'm sure it will, as you've already got thousands of applicants, I guess. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been
Great.
wonderful.
Thanks so much for the call. See you.
Bye-bye.